The president announced a new 50% tariff on.
Over time, we become too dependent on the United States as our biggest customer, with more than 90% of our steel exports going south of the border.
They use tariffs to take our businesses, not only steel, other businesses too.
We must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects.
It all happened in about 10 minutes. On June 4, 2025, President Donald Trump stunned North America by announcing a sudden 50% tariff on all Canadian steel and aluminum. Citing national security, he declared the U.S. could no longer rely on foreign metals for defense and infrastructure. The move was immediate, no negotiations, no warnings, leaving markets and industries reeling. Trucks carrying Canadian steel to U.S. factories were stopped cold, their cargo now unaffordable. For a $1,000 ton of steel, the price for Americans jumped to $1,500 overnight, a cost no one could absorb. The integrated supply chains built over decades were fractured in an instant. News of the tariff spread rapidly, plunging North American manufacturing into chaos. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Trudeau's office scrambled to respond while U.S. business leaders and politicians expressed shock. Many saw the move as a political maneuver, signaling a return to aggressive protectionism. That 10-minute announcement wasn't just a policy change, it was the start of a damaging new trade war. To grasp the impact, you need to understand how deeply the U.S. and Canadian steel industries are connected. Raw materials, semi-finished, and finished goods cross the border multiple times before reaching consumers. Canadian iron ore often goes to U.S. mills, then returns to Canada for finishing, and back again for use in American factories. Proximity and just-in-time supply chains have made this integration efficient and competitive. Before the tariff, Canada was the U.S. largest steel supplier, and the U.S. was Canada's biggest customer. Hundreds of thousands of jobs depended on this two-way flow. The tariff didn't just disrupt trade, it severed a vital artery of North American industry. The assumption that U.S. mills could instantly replace Canadian steel was a fundamental misreading of modern manufacturing. The American auto industry was the first casualty. Within hours, the North American supply chain collapsed. Trucks with Canadian steel were stopped at the border, their cargo now too expensive. Auto plants, built on just-in-time delivery, had no stockpiles. Production lines began shutting down. Managers scrambled for alternatives, but U.S. mills couldn't meet the sudden demand or match the specifications. Overtime was canceled, then entire lines idled, and soon, major automakers announced temporary closures. The policy meant to protect American jobs was putting thousands out of work. The ripple effect hit everyone from assembly workers to suppliers and logistics companies. In Canada, steel mills in cities like Hamilton saw orders vanish overnight, forcing layoffs and production cuts. Trucks sat idle, furnaces went quiet, and thousands of Canadian steelworkers lost their jobs. The tariff didn't just halt trade, it silenced factories on both sides of the border. The economic pain was immediate and widespread. The integrated system that once powered North American manufacturing was now in crisis. The consequences would only deepen in the weeks ahead. Industry leaders responded with unified shock. GM's CEO Mary Barra warned that a tariff on Canadian steel was a tariff on American industry, raising costs and halting production. Even large U.S. steel companies with cross-border operations condemned the chaos, saying the tariff undermined their business model. Unions like the United Auto Workers and United Steel Workers, with members in both countries, decried the immediate job losses. Canadian industry leaders called the move a baseless attack on a trusted partner. Business groups warned the tariff would force Canada to seek new markets and alliances. The consensus: the policy was a historic blunder, inflicting long-term damage on both economies. The lines between foreign and domestic production had blurred. Hurting one side meant hurting both. The fallout was just beginning. The economic shock hit markets instantly. U.S. and Canadian stocks plunged, especially in manufacturing and steel. Auto giants saw their shares tumble as investors braced for production cuts and higher costs. Layoffs rippled through the supply chain, from parts makers to trucking companies. In Canada, steel mills slashed production and scrambled to find new export markets in Europe and Asia. The transition was slow and costly, with global competition fierce. Meanwhile, U.S. producers couldn't fill the gap, leading to shortages and rising prices in construction and manufacturing. The dream of a revitalized U.S. steel industry collided with the reality of higher costs and economic disruption. The tariff, meant to protect, was causing widespread collateral damage. The North American economy was being reshaped, painfully and unpredictably. Canada didn't wait for a resolution. It pivoted. The government launched a multi-billion-dollar green steel transformation fund, helping mills switch to cleaner electric arc and hydrogen-based production. The goal: produce premium, low-carbon steel for global markets. Canadian leaders saw opportunity in Europe's growing demand for green products. Steelmakers fast-tracked decarbonization, aiming to outpace U.S. protectionism with innovation. At the same time, Canada aggressively sought new trade deals in Europe and Asia, reducing reliance on the U.S. The tariff, meant to isolate Canada, instead spurred a wave of modernization and diversification. Canada was betting its future on clean, sustainable industry, and the world was watching. As the trade war raged, Europe's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, changed the global game. CBAM taxed imported steel based on its carbon emissions, penalizing coal-based production. U.S. steel, still largely carbon-intensive, now faced a new barrier in Europe. Meanwhile, Canada's pivot to green steel paid off. Its exports faced lower tariffs and found eager buyers in Europe. The U.S. tariff had inadvertently pushed Canada to become a global leader in low-carbon steel. American industry, shielded at home but penalized abroad, was left isolated. The lesson climate policy was now inseparable from trade policy. In a decarbonizing world, protectionism was a losing strategy. Political pressure mounted as factories idled and job losses grew. Canada lobbied U.S. lawmakers, showing them the local impact of the tariff. President Trump remained defiant, but cracks appeared in his party as constituents demanded relief. Negotiations began, with the U.S. demanding quotas and stricter rules, while Canada insisted on removing the tariff first. Rhetoric escalated, with threats of more tariffs on both sides. Canada prepared retaliatory measures targeting politically sensitive U.S. goods. The standoff became a high-stakes game, with millions of jobs and the future of North American trade at risk. The economic pain was undeniable, but a resolution remained elusive. Both governments faced mounting pressure from business, labor, and voters. The outcome would shape the continent's economic future. The 2025 steel tariff crisis exposed the harsh realities of modern trade. Protectionism promised jobs, but delivered broken supply chains, factory shutdowns, and higher prices. The U.S. couldn't punish its largest trading partner without hurting itself. The idea of a clean, surgical trade war was a fantasy. The reality was mutual destruction. Meanwhile, Canada and Europe invested in the industries of the future: green steel and carbon border taxes. The world was moving toward sustainable, competitive economies while the U.S. risked being left behind. True prosperity comes from resilient, modern industries built in partnership with allies. The real choice wasn't between American and Canadian steel, but between isolation and innovation. As the dust settled, both nations faced a defining question: would they cling to the past, or build a future together? The answer would shape North America for decades.